Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Ernie De Los Santos, founder and faculty chair at Appeal Academy and creator of Top Gun Audit School. We are live on the February 12th, 2016 edition of Finally Friday. And I want to thank you for choosing to spend your time with us here on Finally Friday. Today's Finally Friday broadcast is sponsored by the Health Law Partners, providing solid advice and real solutions for healthcare business nationwide, and by Recovery Analytics, that's Sharon Easterling's company, committed to your success. Finally Friday is now also sponsored by MedLink's Cost Containment, makers of Healthcare Audit Tracker. You should visit zerodenials.com today, see how they can help you track audits and greatly reduce or even eliminate denials. Another sponsor is Aerolib Healthcare Solutions, patient-centered total quality management consulting firm. They are the makers of the Physician Advisor's Guide DVD, which is now also available either by DVD or on demand. And finally, we have the Council for Certification of Medical Auditors, the CCMA. They are the creators of and maintainers of the widely used Certified Medical Audit Specialist, or CMAS, certification. Learn more and earn more with the CCMA. Okay, today we are going to hear about yet another way for you to get out in front of denials, even in front of audits on your claims. The methodology and tools we're going to discuss are collectively known as predictive analytics, and I'm familiar with them from my time as an archaeologist. Now, the insights that you can get from this kind of work are unavailable to you other than using this kind of a tool. They're highly valuable, and you can even prove their value pretty easily. So stick around, stick with us to the end. We have some experts from Zirmed, which is one of the high technology companies that offers this kind of predictive analytics and tools and all the benefits they can afford you. So you can focus on patient care and not so much on payer shenanigans. Okay, I also have on the show my loyal and faithful co-host, Sharon Easterling, who's an auditor, speaker, and appeal writer. My other co-host, Bill Mom, who's a practicing clinician, speaker, and certified medical auditor. The two special guests we have today are Dan Ward, who is Vice President of Strategy at Zirmed, and Glenn Krause, who's been on our show a few times before. You know him. He's the Regional Director for Enterprise Solutions at Zirmed. They're going to help us. They're going to help tell us what's the value of predictive analytics and those kinds of tools. And, of course, they do have those kind of tools. But we're going to tell you about why you need something like this in your life. Okay, so a few things before we get going here. I want to pull up the website, and of course my computer is not cooperating. Of course, why should it cooperate? Okay, here we go. If you are new to the show, you want to go to appealacademy.com. On any page on the site, you scroll down, you get to this thing. It's called Meeting Room Instructions. And when you click on that, it will open a page that gives you instructions on how to use the toolbar, the control panel at the top of your screen when you log in. It'll tell you how to do audio settings, but you probably already know how to do that. Best thing for you to do is to open the chat box, the second button from the left, because we have a pretty active chat room usually on our show, and that's sometimes even a different conversation. Anyway, you can also zoom in and out of things if you want to, if I'm not zoomed in enough for you. Then there's also a list of participants. Now, in this, I suggest that you identify yourself. You're usually the top one on the list. In that second box from the right, you open that up, you get a dialog box. And if you point at you, it will then give you a little pop-up next to it that lets you change your name. You don't have to put in your whole name. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but lots of people do, so we know who we're talking to. And you can even talk back and forth to each other privately through the chat room. You don't have to talk to everybody. Yeah, forget about asking for control of the room. I'm not going to do that. Okay. And then if you are not aware, on the This Week on Finally Friday page, every week there is, scroll down and you get to the box. This blue box looks the same all the time. Enter an email address and you can get a zip file with all of the handouts this week. If you have trouble using that zip file or if that doesn't work for you, look on the Aorta forum. That's at aerolib.com, and look for the Aorta Forum, and I post handouts there as well later, and for some people that seems to work better as a way to get the handouts. Okay, so now let me get back to the slideshow. Okay, you are seeing the slides, right, Bill?
Yes, it's changing.
Okay. All right, great.
It's got
then
the people's faces.
Okay, good. Then what we want to do is just talk about briefly, we're going to talk about the news a little bit. Last week we talked about, we had a great presentation by Dr. John Zellum from EHR. He was talking about his research and experiences on using copying and cloning, and so we talked about that, and we talked about, why it might be a good idea to clone some things, bad idea to clone others, and then there are ugly choices as well. That was last week. You can find that on our site. This week, of course, we're talking about how you're going to be able to find out the truth about what's going on in your revenue integrity, and you don't have to be Fox Mulder or Dana Scully to do that. So first, some news. I've got 3 items about news, and then we're going to get into the show. First thing I wanted to do was talk about this. We're going to probably talk about next week on the show. I don't know if it'll take the whole show. I haven't looked at it in a while. But the full Senate is now getting to consider the Affirm Act. Now, it's been in front of the Senate Finance Committee. We had a bunch of articles about it that talked about all the changes and things. There's actually some really significant good things for providers in there. And we will talk about all that next week, okay? But this is actually, I put the bill in your handouts today, so you've got this copy that appeared in the Federal Register. Another thing is that CMS issued this guide, which I thought was kind of strange, but I understand the reasoning behind it. Everything just feels kind of weird to me that it's their guide to how you can prevent readmissions for racially and ethnically diverse Medicare beneficiaries. Now, to me, that just feels a little funny. And what's really funny about this to me is that it's, again, another example. This kind of reminds me of No Child Left Behind. They put it out, and they don't give you any money for it, and they demand that you, as a recipient of government funds, you have to take care of this. You have to do this. We'll tell you some ideas about how to do it, but you have to go pay for it and do it, and this is what we expect from you. Well, that's the same thing here. They're not talking about taking into consideration that racially and ethnically diverse people may get readmitted more. You get penalized whether they're in this class or not. So I don't like it. But anyway, that's me. Anyway, that's in the handouts today for you to go to look at. Something that's not in the handouts because it's online is there were hearings this week in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and Secretary Sylvia Burwell did testify before them. It's about 2.5 hours worth. These are the links. I'm not going to go over it now. We just don't have time to do that today, but I'll probably talk about it some more next week. But she did, comment and tell them they are totally committed to moving to alternative payment models, 30% of their outlays by the end of this year, and then 50% by 2018. These are the links to the bottom one is to the page on the Senate Finance Committee website, and then this other one is if you want to watch the 2.5-hour streaming video of it, that's there. Another thing that she talked about was how they're strengthening the program integrity, so they're asking for another $199 million in order to go after all that. And they don't know how to spell scorable, which is, I guess, not a big deal. The one thing I found that was interesting, and this is the last bit of news, is that she was talking about, because they keep talking about the moonshot idea of President Obama's moonshot idea of curing cancer. And they're talking about, okay, with a 1% drop in cancer deaths, they saved the economy $500 million. And it occurs to me, okay, so tell me again why we're spending so much money on racks. How much money are we spending on this? I don't think they're spending anywhere near as much money on this as they're spending on all that other effort. So anyway, that's just my thought. I'll talk about it more next week. Okay, let's get over to the show. in what we're going to talk about this week. And again, like I said, we're talking about predictive analytics. Now, I don't expect a lot of you to know that much about predictive analytics. Again, like I said, I know about it because we used it a lot in archaeology because we would dig up things. We'd dig up a lot of data, and then we'd look at the data and massage it and look for correlations and things about what we could learn from all that data. Well, you can do the same thing by looking up. You're not going to dig up an old hospital. You're just going to dig through your data. And so what we're going to talk about today are really the three biggest points about it. What does predictive analytics do? What algorithms do and why they're important? What they mean for you? What the use of algorithms can do for you? And you can't do that on your own. You can't learn what algorithms can learn and dig up for you. You can't do that on your own. Simply impossible. And then the fourth thing we'll talk about is some examples of, well, what are some examples of what really works and what happens. So, all right, Bill, so you can jump in.
Yeah, hi. I want to thank everybody and happy Valentine's Day weekend, guys. Don't forget to buy somebody a present, and you know what I mean. Predictive analytics, in my role as an auditor, is kind of my world. We used to be able to, at a time in the dark ages, be able to look at claim by claim by claim if there was a problem. We no longer can do that. We have high volumes of claims, high volumes of complexity. We have to compare ourselves to others. We have to compare ourselves to ourselves. And we have to be able to take these random data elements, these random points, and make some sense out of it. So, when you're in medicine, you're looking at those random points and you're trying to make that picture. We're doing the same thing in auditing. Now, sometimes it's a derivative of a big data talk. Sometimes if you're at HIMSS, it's a software. But what predictive analytics is, and first of all, let's say what it's not. It is not a collection of rules. It is a relational database where you're looking at different random elements and trying to make sense out of it. So predictive analytics has been used in defense. It's been used in banking for a long time. It's come to healthcare rather recent, last 5-6 years. And it now is in the world of clinical documentation improvement, compliance, contracting, especially managed care contracting. We're having to feed back to, like right now, Blue Cross is under investigation in North Carolina because they use predictive analytics, and they found out they're not answering their phone often enough. Extreme productivity. How do I get to productivity? I have 3 auditors that have to look at 5,000 records. How am I going to get them there? That's a big question. They can't do it by human means anymore. So dumping the data, your claims data, your charge data, your coding data, just put it into something you consider to be the universe, a big pot maybe, where you have all these data points that you can pull at random and start to analyze their relationships to each other. When you arrive at these relationships through algorithms, you are then able to paint a picture that you can remediate. And I've seen case studies, I think Dan and Glenn may talk about it today, but one of the things that is always important with analytics is, first of all, I need to identify what's going on. I have to see what is the picture this is painting. Then maybe it's painting an adverse picture. I don't want this going on, or I do want this going on and I want to continue it. So what is the root cause, and how am I going to mitigate that root cause if it's adverse? It allows you to focus on your remediation points and then creates a better outcome. Now, in Six Sigma, we call it DMAIC with the measure, analyze, implement, and control. This is very important. With predictive analytics, you may put in a resolution step, and we all know we work inside a house, that as fast as we do it, it may come undone again, so you're going to need to monitor it. You're going to want to look at these relational data points. So when we look at auditing, both inpatient, outpatient, any data point can be reviewed. The big key is who's using it. And we know that the government uses it for RACs, for MACs, for all these selection tools. We know that the hospitals have not really use this enough. They're still relying on more of a consulting opportunity or possibly internal report writing, but they're really not into the predictives yet. But in the last 12 months, I've seen a huge shift towards predictive analytics internally. So, for example, here's one of my days. I have 5,000 cases I have to go through with 3 auditors. It's not going to happen. So what I want to do is run all that data in. I want to look at it 2 ways. I want to look at it against ourselves and against maybe what United Healthcare has for their database. Because you can buy proprietary databases. And then we're able to see where we need to focus our audit attention in a very laser-focused way. This is probably something that may not work for us. So we use historical claims data to predict future events. So if you're having problems with a certain section of readmissions, maybe CHF, you may find out that when you do the predictive analytics that all those people have social concerns. They're homeless. You may be able then to mitigate that. So there's all sorts of ways to use the predictive analytics, but I think today is about let's open our mind. Let's think about ways to look at ourselves in a very introspective way.
Right.
I know the government does this. This is how we ended up with ventilators greater than 96 hours, but they were looking at the units, and it was less than 96 hours, or the from and through dates. So they were able to see that analytical, that algorithm that could then pull people. Pepper data, also
right.
Another analytics. Yes, there are rules with that, and that's not what this is, but they found those rules through some analytics. So I think we see this all the time. Sharon, I think you've got some CDI examples we may want to talk about, but I think the analytics has to be key now. I know that this group, we kind of live the 2 midnight rule and the inpatient-only list and whatever. We've used predictive analytics to find out which physicians are most likely to violate the inpatient-only rule. So we put all the physician pools in, the number of errors, and we're able to then focus our attention on re-educating those groups instead of constantly re-educating the group. So there are all sorts of ways to use predictive analytics in an algorithm. So, Dan,
right.
Do you have anything that we can pitch in here on this?
Let's see.
Did Dan join us yet? Glenn, you guys?
Dan's not on the call yet?
I haven't seen him yet. I know he's traveling to try and get to.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the.
I wanted to add something, if you don't mind, Bill. Some of the you raised some very interesting points. Recently, I had a position where I worked. I worked hand in hand with the denials team to be reactive in terms of identifying the denials and then going out and finding out what's wrong and then doing the education and not so much education but knowledge sharing with physicians on best practices for documenting orders and so forth. I can see if I had this tool in my arsenal of resources when I was actually working with our denials and appeals department, as you said, I'd be out way in front in terms of identifying these issues way before they happen, because reactive means you have not maybe just one denial, you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20, particularly with services that are serial services like high cost drugs. So I would say this tool would have helped me dramatically in avoiding denials, because we would have been able to identify, hey, let's stop giving IV Remicade, or go back to the physician and get some additional information, or maybe this is not the right drug for the diagnoses, because we wouldn't be giving one dose of $7,000 or $8,000 cost for let's say 6 weeks before we found out we were not getting paid. So reactive is proactive is a key term.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very important because the government is doing the analytics. If you're not doing analytics to get RACs and MACs and all, if you're not doing your own analytics, you're just waiting for them to identify your issue. So I see a lot of money being spent on defense of the RACs sending in, 68% settlement, all that, which I totally agree with. You have to do that. But now I think you're almost obligated to start the introspective phase. Okay, we've all learned through experience the government can find things. Now, do we always agree with their conclusion? Absolutely not. But what was the pattern of behavior that you submitted in your claims data that caused them to select you? The whole key here is not to get selected. It's not to defend it or appeal it. It's to not have it happen in the first place. So when adenosine came out and the units of service or units of service with colonoscopies, that was all predictive analytics. There is one huge data warehouse, and that's United Healthcare. They have the biggest amount of claims data in the world. The next step is the U.S. government. So, and they tend to use all sorts of high-value analytics. So Maria's asking, are there some generic high-value analytics that you could share? Yes, high-value analytics are definitely in your units of service for drugs. You can look and see if there's a pattern of there's a package size and what have you. You can look at analytics for those readmissions and then predict the probability of this readmission happening. Again, I mean, we're all under the 30-day readmission issue. We want to not have that happen. So figure out in advance by doing introspective predictive analytics where you might deploy resources such as home health or a community-based service to keep that patient from being readmitted. So CHF, COPD, these are high readmission rates. It's seasonal. What are those medical models? And from predictive analytics, especially in Wisconsin, they have made these medical homes. So they knew that if they can control the A1Cs more often, and the patients put in their A1C every day into basically a teledoc type of system, and they can monitor the A1C, the probability of that patient being admitted or having a diabetic result soon in the future is found. Now, National Health Service in the United Kingdom has been using predictive analytics for their qualities for almost a decade. And so they have significant case studies out there on what they use. They use it for pneumonia. They use it for, the probability of readmission. They have the probability of diabetic results. So they have a lot of these. Infectious disease, they can predict that. So predictive analytics in those national healthcare type environments has been around for a while, and the reason is everybody's in the risk pool. They have the data on everybody so they can come up with it. In the U.S., until the Affordable Care Act, unless you really had insurance, you may not seek health care. So we had a different thing, but predictive analytics is really starting to show up. The 2 midnight rule. How often are you having that issue where you're not meeting it? Is there a doc? Is there a disease process around? So you can use it in almost any way. And remember, it's just random data fields. So you can do analytics on anything. It's just you put all this data in a big pot and then select what you think you'd like to look at for your random association. It's called a relational database for a reason. You're trying to relate one thing to the next. So this is where analytics goes. So why don't we get on to the next slide and maybe we'll go through.
I think Dan's on the call now.
Oh, okay. Dan, can you? We're not hearing you yet, I think.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can hear me now.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Perfect.
No, I was going to say what we were intending to do is what we've been talking about here is, what's the power of predictive analytics? And then we had Dr. Johar ask, what about some high-value analytics, just some generic ones, and Bill's been talking about those. And what I wanted to do was now move to talking about, well, that's predictive analytics, but the better way to use predictive analytics, the more powerful way, is to do it with algorithms. And that's what, Dan, you and I were talking the other day about it. You were saying it's basically the same thing as what Netflix does. And so I thought, well, everybody can relate to that. You do Netflix and chill, and every time you watch something, you binge on Netflix for a while, and it starts giving you suggestions about other movies or other series that you might like to watch. And the way they do that, it's not magic. They have an introspective algorithm behind it on their site, and that's what they do, and that's how they use it. They don't have somebody sitting there pulling up your file and looking at it to see whether or not you watch this kind of movie or not. They have an algorithm that uses predictive analytics and does that. And just briefly, let me, and then I'm going to let Dan explain a little bit more about it. If you don't understand what an algorithm is, it's basically just a black box. It can be mechanical, it can be human, it's a formula, it's whatever. You got data that comes in, it goes into the black box, that's the algorithm, and it puts out something that's even better. This is the one that I hated in high school because I never knew why I wanted to know that. But anyway, so what you get, though, is you get real power from using the algorithms, and like all the things that we were just talking about, that Dr. Johar was asking about that Bill mentioned, each of those are very valuable. And the trouble is you got to do them, normally you got to do them manually. So you got to go, okay, you got to go do that, and you can do the predictive analytics. The key about having an algorithm and a tool that has lots of algorithms is it's automatic. And so I think that's a key for Dan to jump in here. This is what those algorithms can do for you and what they produce. So Dan, am I on the right page here?
Yeah, absolutely. And apologize for not being able to chime in earlier. I can assure you I was talking up a storm, but apparently you guys couldn't hear me.
Okay.
So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And if there's one thing I really want people to understand, broadly speaking, about how algorithms can be leveraged, it's this notion that both yourself and Bill have already touched on. Especially through machine learning algorithms, you relieve yourself of the burden of having to create these rules. And rules versus algorithms, I think, is a key differentiator here. By way of example, and let's simply use charge capture because that's a very easy, straightforward one. To prevent charge capture leakage, you can certainly create any number of rules as simplistic as when I have a pacemaker insertion coded, I sure better have the C code that goes along with it to capture the fact that I'm charging for the device as well. That's rather straightforward, and you can spend significant time creating a library of those rules. The beauty of machine learning algorithms is they will do that for you, and they will do that at a volume and velocity that even an army of charge capture experts couldn't match. It's not unusual, for example, for machine learning algorithms to create hundreds of thousands of rules in 24 hours that are unique to your facility's charging, billing, and coding practices. It will then flag any deviations from those norms, the charge capture leakage, and you didn't have to send 2 auditors, a nurse, and a CDM coordinator into a conference room for 3 days and have them whiteboard out and hypothesize on how to find this. The artificial intelligence machine learning does that for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I was saying, that the value of this and the reason that we used to do this, I mean, you can do all this stuff with spreadsheets and, small access databases or whatever you want, or even just challenge your finance department. But the value of this is just like what Dan said. What if you had, if you think that's valuable, well, what if you had an army of auditors or charge capture experts or, coding experts sitting there looking at these things? That would be even more valuable, right? But who can afford an army of them? Well, the difference is with an algorithm, you then have the machines doing it, and they are nowhere near as expensive. It's not putting anybody out of a job. It's just that they can do it a lot better, a lot faster, and a lot more accurately.
And I want to point out, Ernie, that the Secretary mentioned in your prior slide $199 million are going into program integrity, and a large portion of those dollars are going into a bigger infrastructure for machine learning analytics. So,
right, they're not hiring auditors.
Yeah,
they're
right.
It's
not a human feature. It's not an FTE. And the other thing is a human has to think it one way. The machine learning algorithm can look at it from infinitesimal viewpoints. So the machine learning can create these things very quickly where you may never get to the same point after weeks, as Dan points. So this is why this type of technology and technique should be advancing within the institutions at this point in order to keep current as we move to more quality-based things and what have you. Those analytics have to go in. The machine learning, again, is going to be crucial as we move forward because it's not going to always be straight fee-for-service. They're going to have some component of value-based. Even risk. We're going to start to see some of that. So I think these machine learning algorithms and analytics are absolutely going to be that next reasonable step in healthcare.
I think it's reasonable to say that. Go ahead, Sharon.
I was talking earlier. I think I had a Dan moment earlier where I was kind of feeling
okay.
As we've talked about population health management over the past few episodes that we've had this show, this is going to be a strong tool for that. And a good example is, I know Dan was mentioning something about, rules alone can't help us. We need something to look at the data and help us analyze it because, everybody's talking about bringing on data analytic experts and you're running all these reports. They have all these different systems that they're using. You have one, hospitals that's on one EHR. You have another one that's on another platform for the revenue cycle. So you're doing all these report comparisons. Where with a tool like this, let's just say if we wanted to look at our sepsis population and we wrote a rule that says, if our patient's hypotensive, if they have, if their WBCs are X, if they're on X drug, then they're probably septic. Well, this can go a step further, and it can start analyzing those that data for you and looking at the charges. Dan mentioned to me this goes beyond the 837, which is what a lot of software providers tell us now. We get your 837 data and we get, we read it. But this goes further than that. This actually reads your entire bill. So it knows everything that's happening with that patient. So it can go a step further and look and say, well, these patients are getting these things consistently. And guess what? X percentage of these are inpatient. So if some of those are falling out, if you have a high sepsis rate, Bill's talking about the Pepper report, this gives you a way of being ahead of Pepper because then you're going to know if you're falling outside of the realm for your inpatients for sepsis. Are you doing something with the diagnosis there? It can give you a segmented portion of patients that you need to look at and possibly operationalize some changes in your facility for. So that's one of the dramatic pieces there.
And I was going to say, Dan, tell us what kind of data you guys use in your tools in Zirmed, because that's a good indication of what's possible and how it's better, again, than just having rules or just looking at the 835 data or something like that, which is pretty typical.
Yeah, that's an excellent point regarding the 837 versus a more granular level of data. Obviously, one of the limitations of human review and this hypothesizing of rules is you can only hold so much in your head at one time. You can only deal with a limited number of attributes. So when you're talking about machine learning algorithms, the more granular, the more robust the data set they're looking at, the more powerful the results. So we have done, and I'll stress that this isn't necessarily our norm, but we have done pilot projects with academic medical centers where, for example, we took in weather data so that we could juxtapose outside high and low temperatures with what we were getting from charging and clinical coding data. And why we did that was very specifically for a pneumonia readmissions predictive algorithm set. And what we found, I'll skip right to the kind of the meat of what happened, is we actually were able to statistically prove, again, not because myself and several of Glenn and his counterparts were pulling records and trying to make these comparisons, the algorithms noticed nearly immediately that when a patient was younger than the average pneumonia patient on the floor at a given time and the temperature outside was unseasonably warm, their readmission probability was higher than it should have otherwise been. And at first we thought, wait a second, it's warmer out? That doesn't make sense. We took it to the case managers, talked through it, and then it made perfect sense. If it's 20 below and you have a 90-year-old woman on the floor, you're not going to discharge her if her diagnosis is pneumonia. But when it's 20 degrees above normal and you have a 42-year-old male saying he's ready to go home, you're just getting him out of that bed. So it made perfect sense as we talked through it with URCM.
Ah, and that's something, yeah. Whoever would have thought to put that in a spreadsheet? You just can't do it. Yeah. And here's somebody saying, Sharon, you got a great explanation of how to look at the data prior to the Pepper report so you can drill down with your team to determine the cause and effect and possible work on process changes. Exactly. That's the point exactly.
Absolutely. You know, I had someone call me from, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Research Triangle here in North Carolina. This is like our little think tank of IT folks, and they're trying to build software for payers that does this because they want to be able to do this more with payers. And lots of payers can already do this. The government can already do this. As providers, it's important for us to be able to know the pattern of our patients, be able to put things in place prior to it happening to, guess what, help us prevent denials and help us to understand what's going on for population health so we can get our arms around it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that they use it a lot down there at Research Triangle. Let's not forget pharma. Pharma uses data analytics, machine analytics, relational databases when they come up with potential hypothesis for drugs, and that combination of factors that may lead to drug susceptibility. So this has long been used in the pharma world in the clinical side for analytics. So we in the billing side or in the revenue cycle side, it may be a little newer to us, but if you go over and talk to your researchers, they're going to say they've done something like this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it can possibly help you with treating, too, understanding how to treat your patients, especially with cancer patients as they're trying to come up with ways to do the certain stages for certain drugs and certain treatments. I bet it could give you a very good picture of what's happening with that patient.
Hey,
what it does all end into is these actionable insights. That's the key to all of this, is it provides insight, it's transparency into your trends, into your root causes. We see the DMAIC teams or the DAMAC teams out everywhere now, and the Lean Six is embedded in every facility now. It gives you the second look back, scorecards. You can do insurance scorecards. We do insurance scorecards with analytics. It's not this type of analytics, but we do machine analytics on our denials to find out if I've got a payer who is slow paying or whatever, so that when it comes to managed care contracting or I need an immediate amendment, I'm going to go after them with data because they're going to say they didn't do it. And now we have phone wait times and things like that being logged in that we're able to do some analytics that says, you guys are not accessible. And so you're going to have to extend your hours from the normal business day because we need our office being up to 11 o'clock at night, and you're going to have to do that. So this is everywhere. I think it's new to the revenue cycle, but what Zirmed's done, and I've seen their tools and used their tools, what Zirmed's does a little different. Their machine algorithms are really, really cutting edge here.
Yeah, they got I think we were talking about, it's probably 1 million rules that the darn thing has made by now, right, Dan?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, for a single client, it's not unusual for 2 million denial probability rules to be created within 24 hours. And the beauty of this, and I know we've touched on it, but machine learning algorithms, they don't stop, they don't ask for time off. Someone typed that we have to be careful they don't become self-aware, so maybe they will eventually ask for PTO. But they're looking at 5,000 accounts per second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, tasked with nothing but finding more correlations, more meaningful patterns, and to Bill's point, Ernie's point, Sharon's point, making them actionable. That's what matters. If you don't make them actionable, it's nothing more than a computer science class. It's intellectual exercise, but it doesn't do anything.
Well, that's perfect for this.
From a review standpoint, my mind just starts going all over over the place here because I think about a lot of these patients that come in with some of the symptom diagnoses, and I sent Ernie and Bill an email about this earlier. But I think about some of those symptom diagnoses, and I think about what's the probability or what's the analytics around that, what's their ages, what's their sex, what's some of the treatments they're on, to where it could give me almost a work list to say, Sharon, you need to target these patients because these are your potential problem patients that are coming to your ED. So, and that's just a little small piece of possibly what this could do, and it could be huge as far as a payment implication. But that gives you an idea of the power, where it can give you potentially a list of patients that you need to focus on.
Yeah, and what I to me, it's the whole concept of, and we've mentioned it a few times, introspection. It gives you, that's, the previous slide, okay, here's the kind of stuff you get from it. This is what you can get out of it. The actionable insights, the massive introspection on all those things that you can catch. Well, what are you going to do with all that? What's it mean to you? So what? Well, this is the so what. There's no more guessing. So it's you get all these things from the introspection. This is the result that you get out of it. It's not just, I'm a geek, all right? I love this stuff because getting all that stuff out is fun. To me, that's fun. But it's why I was in archaeology for a while. But but to you, you're not the geek. You're the one that's got to make this, make this pay. And this is the kind of stuff that it will do to let you get out in front. It pinpoints stuff for you, and it's not something you have to go keep asking for all the time. I know, Dan, this is something like your tools, they do this, you said, like it does it all the time, right? You set this stuff up and it starts running?
Correct, and then we'll have the data scientists tend to the garden from time to time, but once you have a good machine learning algorithm in place, it should be driving its own benefit through that AI. And continually adapting and evolving to either changes in the reimbursement landscape that begin to come in, or changes in shifts in patient demographics, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's definitely going to help, your care management team. They're doing those discharge planning. It would be crucial if they could use the analytics to say, hey, this patient is likely to be a high-risk discharge. So they know that coming in. So the patient coming into the house may even be determined at time of admission to be a high-risk discharge. So this is going to be very, very helpful as we start doing those mandatory discharge plannings and everything else. The analytics, again, are going to save the ROI. Maria was writing just a minute ago about the ROI. The ROI on something like this is really dependent on how much they find, but if you think about 5,000 charts in a very short time or 200,000 in an overnight period, that's 200,000 opportunities to find new ROI. And usually the ROI is in the several millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in these passes. And it also keeps you cleaner longer, so you're not paying to keep those efficiencies up, because as Dan said, that machine doesn't have overtime. It doesn't have weekends or holidays. It's running. So this is a great way to not only get new ROI, but do what I consider protective ROI, protect what you have.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
I just wanted to just compliment that, what discussion is. I was reading last night one of the OIG hospital compliance reports, and they always say we use data mining and data analysis and other algorithms to identify high-risk areas. So to me, even before I was working with Vermed, I was thinking, why hasn't someone come up with a tool that could level the playing fields? Because if the Payors and the Macs and the certs and all those good people have the tools, why don't we have the same type of tools so we can circumvent the problems that exist and perpetuate themselves for years until someone finds it, and then they extrapolate and want $3 or $4 million back? We can fix the problem, right? So I think part of the return on investment is going to be penalties and extrapolations and arguing with the government how valid the extrapolation is.
Right, and it's not over when you first find those issues. So you do the run, you get this set up, and you find an issue, you figure out how to go fix it, and then the system runs again, and it says, okay, we're not seeing the issue anymore. You don't have to run it again. That AI is still going to be checking. So if it shows, I mean, how many of you talk to a doctor or a group of doctors, and you get something fixed, and 3 months later it shows that same issue shows back up again? That's pretty typical, I think. So the value of this is not only that it helps you fix it the first time, it keeps an eye on it for you. I mean, who's got time to do that? You don't. So you get to keep. The benefits keep going. And then one thing we haven't talked about yet, we're going to talk about some examples here in a minute, but this is something that I think is really cool, is that you can now have data that you can go negotiate with your payers about. You can see what their patterns are, what their denial patterns are. Why does this not make sense? Or you explain to us how this makes sense, and you can now negotiate with them, whereas previously you may not have had any of that data, and all you can do is complain about it and talk to them about it. This way you can say, you can at least have the evidence that supports your case. This needs to be fixed if we're going forward. And I think that's a big deal. And I know, Bill, you've had cases where you go into negotiations with the payers. You got to be able to bring things up and talk to them. You can't just give them a general idea. We don't like what you're doing.
You have to know yourself better than others know yourself, and I've said that since day one of the show. If you don't know yourself better than somebody on the outside knows your operations and your practice by what you're telling them through claims data, then shame on you. I mean, you have the same opportunity. So I think part of this is understanding that you need to want to know what's going on in your backyard. Now, for many of us that have worked in facilities, that's a big cultural hurdle to get over. A lot of facilities, they say they want to change, they want to do it better, but sometimes that is the hurdle you're having to get over, a cultural issue. So if you can show them why it's beneficial to them to do things through some of these outcome measurements, that will help change the culture. Because if you go to physicians and you say, you know what, our data analytics show that you've discharged somebody 15 times prematurely, you're not going to get a very good response from that physician. But if you say, you know what, your patient's outcomes improve by 85% if you do this, our data can show you that, they're more likely to comply. So it's very, very important that we understand there's a cultural component, that this can help, and you really need to understand what your own backyard looks like.
Yeah, and we all know physicians love data. Why wouldn't they? Go ahead, Sharon.
And I think about Maria's question. Hello, Maria. How are you today? On the return on investment, and I think about coverage and time. And it makes me think about, having our staff cover areas at certain times or certain departments. What if you had a way that you could determine when are those times that you receive denials in a specific area or at a specific time, so you can ramp up coverage at those times, or, possibly not need coverage. So I think the return on the investment could really be mixed. I think it just depends on how you use the tool and how you look at the data, from the simple things, as Bill and Dan are talking about, to really some of the more complex looks of how we operate functionally within our facility.
Yeah. So there's a lot more than just the denials and those kind of patterns that you can look at. The trick, though, is probably to get in the door, is to get your facility to get on board with using predictive analytics and these kind of tools. So let's talk about how you might do that, because there are some good examples And Bill, I know you were telling us the other day some good examples, and then and I know Dan and Glenn have some examples to talk about. You know, where can you see some really quick benefits from this to the bottom line? So, Bill,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
ask Dan. I'm going to ask Dan to jump in here. The propensity to pay may be something that most of the listeners on the phone struggle with because it's somewhat embedded in some sort of admissions data or whatever. So, Dan, if you could give us a little snippet on the propensity to pay, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about propensity to pay and how most healthcare providers are attempting to quantify that, I think most would be doing it with a credit score. And not to take us off on too much of a sidetrack, but in a way, a FICO credit score is also a predictive algorithm that predicts the likelihood that you will pay any residual balance that you have, be it a credit card or a medical bill. What we have found is, particularly with high deductible health plans and patient residuals, not necessarily true self-pay, although it does apply there as well, but the behavior changes very much with these residuals, and we have found in many parts of the country that credit score is actually an almost non-correlated data point with true propensity to pay. So what we believe is that most of our providers have a wealth of data in their own system regarding payment patterns over years and years, and you may or may not know it, but for whatever reason in your community, people are much more open to the idea of paying off their copay in full or their deductible when they had procedure X versus procedure Y, or interacted with the primary surgeon as D versus C, et cetera, et cetera. So what we found was not only is credit score non-correlated, but within our healthcare provider clients' own data is a tremendous wealth of very accurate predictions on propensity to pay. We found that one client, for example, if they had been in the longitudinal data for more than exactly 38 months, something magical happened. They paid their bills with incredible regularity, and you could argue it's a proxy for do they feel like part of the community, et cetera. We've had other clients where if they had a minor in the system, someone who shared their address, shared other traits with them, and was under the age of 18, then this individual is much more likely to pay their bill, which again, once you see the analytics, be it the readmissions in warmer weather or the propensity to pay with a child in the health system, it makes sense. I don't want my wife to bring our kid to his checkup and she's told that they have an annoying balance to pay because I didn't get around to paying my balance. I don't want to hear about that when I get home from work. So of course I'm more likely to pay my bill under that scenario. So you find these incredible correlations that give really accurate propensity to pay that are prescriptive to your health system. They aren't shoehorned in from around the country or using other data points. It's your own data tells you something very meaningful, and you should use it.
And you've got all that data. It's all sitting there, right? Right, Dan? It's all sitting there waiting for somebody to pull out.
That's the irony. Every healthcare provider in the United States is sitting on an invaluable mountain of data that they actually, if they were looking, they could probably find people who would pay them good money to get their hands just on that data. So you're sitting on free information and an absolute wealth of it. I would encourage everybody to use it.
And I'm going to take us across the pond. I mean, I remember one research study that I was in where we used machine algorithms, and we took the temperature, the heart rate, the respiratory rate, all these functions off the ICU monitors, off of the patient vital signs as it went into the system, and they were able to predict the onset of sepsis within 25 minutes. So they were able to tell which patients on admission were likely to become septic, and they were able to do it within 25 minutes of when they actually first noted it. So they were able to put in those preventative antibiotics that stop the sepsis before it started, and therefore have a much better outcome. And a sick patient that stays in for days, that's you're going to lose on the DRG, but they figured out in their quality outcome if they could keep the patient well, or which patients were likely to get septic, they could provisionally treat it. So there were all sorts of quality clinical outcomes data. Pneumonia, they were able to predict, like Dan pointed out earlier, if it's 4 degrees and it's North Carolina, they're going to get pneumonia. They actually had a study on HIV outcomes. who was likely to get it, and so that they could target their education and their research there. So NHS has been using this. Australian government's been using this on the clinical side for a while. This may be new in terms of revenue cycle, because I think in the revenue cycle we frequently just chase our tail trying to stay ahead of the government, and I don't think we stop, take a breath, and look at what those tools are that can help us help ourselves.
And I want to go ahead, Sharon.
I think it could be used for strategic planning as well. I work, very closely with finance, looking at different service lines, trying to, decide services that we're going to offer or expand to. I think the possibilities are definitely endless. Once you get that data, like Dan says, we have a mountain of data. We just don't have the tools to do what we need to do with it.
Yeah. I was just going to suggest we have a case study from Zermed that talks about this. Bill, you were looking at that earlier. Tell me what's in that case. I'm going to suggest
they have one case study out on their site, and it's really pretty impressive. It was for a regional medical center, and they were able to look at the analytics that they didn't have, and very quickly through this machine learning analytic, they were able to come up with about a $10 million fold of uncovered new money. These are efficiencies. They're not things that we already know. We're going to manipulate it so it's still in the pond. These are actual new efficiencies. And remember, when you look at your margin, $10 million, depending on the size of your hospital, could be a 1, 2, or 3%. It's definitely a bottom line changer. So when you look at this, you have to look at analytics from a very strategic way. And most people don't right now, but I think predictive analytics and algorithms and what have you, if you look at this as a strategic necessity to move your facility forward clinically and financially, this is very important. I mean, it's going to have to come in when we start looking at those patient experiences. Patient experiences are really important right now. If you lose a patient, you used to lose maybe a family, but now with social media, you could lose a community. So it's very important, those patient experiences. I mean, the HCAPs, people are out there looking at what is this showing it. And these relational databases, if you can find it, you can fix it. And that's what you don't know is going to hurt you. And that's kind of where my theme is with this one today.
Yeah. And we had a question, somebody asking, okay, so what systems are out there that can be used, and where do we find the people to run these kind of programs? Well, that's, a perfect question. I mean, that's why we invited Zermed on the show. They have tools that do this. Of course, there were other people, but I invited Zermed because in looking at their tools, I mean, Glenn's the first one that told me about their tools, and when he told me about them, I was very excited because, yes, I do know of other tools out there. This one is the most complete and most extensive that I've seen. And I know, Bill, you've seen their stuff, and, this is something, it's worth a look. If you want to see this case study, because if I remember right, Bill, you were saying this other case study, the one I've got here, I don't think this is the same one that's on their site. This one has solutions about analytics, results for early identification of problems. It helped in root cause analysis. It helped on focus remediation, improve their clean claims and decrease their denials, which, and all this is straight to what you were saying, Phil, about DMAC. If you guys want a copy of this, I didn't get to put it in the handouts. You want a copy of this case file, put your email in the chat box, and I'll send it to you right after the show. And it's a good example. Bill, can you tell us any more about that, or Dan, can you? What was in this case study?
I think Dan might be best.
Okay.
Yeah, so I apologize for not being able to see specifically which case study you're referencing, but I think I know which one you are, so apologies. But what I will say is it is not unusual for these types of analytics to be run behind more traditional rules-based, what we now consider antiquated solutions. and still uncover these significant pockets of revenue. I think that's thematically at the core of most of our case studies, that it's not unusual for us to go to a healthcare provider who buttoned up their rev cycle or their URCM through those traditional tools. They ask us to go behind as a safety check, and what we uncover is just this world of hidden pockets. We call them the needles in the haystack. They're small, they pop up here and there, but in aggregate, they can impact an organization's bottom line by millions of dollars. And that's precisely why you need this type of technology, because these things don't reside in giant islands anymore where you come ashore and fix the problem. There's tiny pockets of revenue hiding all throughout the hospital, and you can't have people go after them anymore. It requires a technology to seek those out.
Yeah, it's just, again, that's why, to me, I mean, when I was in archaeology doing this kind of stuff, looking for data, and I had a mountain of data, well, I wanted a computer to, stick the algorithms in there because I just didn't have time. Nobody had time to, go do this manually. But I knew the value of what you could get out of it. So same thing. Okay, so we have a good number of people. I think I'm going to be asking Dan and Glenn to give me a demo of their tool. I've only seen little pieces of it so far, and I'll see about inviting other people to that. I highly recommend you guys take a look at that. And so so keep putting your email in the box. I'll leave the chat box up for a while. I don't normally copy the chat box, but for something like this, I'll copy out those emails just so everybody knows. But that's it for time. Go ahead.
So I just want to close by saying, and just to reiterate, it to me levels the playing field from a standpoint of being proactive in identifying high risk areas, just like the compliance report of OIG say these are the typical high, or they say here's the high risk areas we identified in the data. Well, they have a tool just like this. Why not be able to speak efficiency and effectiveness and be proactive and getting in front of this, and also at the same time finding additional avenues for revenue that you didn't have, that you didn't know, and you probably would never know.
Right, and there's so many advantages to this. It just boggles my mind, and I understand the power of it. It's something that all of you ought to seriously consider and look at. I mean, it definitely goes a long way towards helping you get out in front of all the things that we deal with.
Guys,
well, anyway,
I have to jump off for my meeting, but it's been a pleasure to be part of this today.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm sorry I got to jump off.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
You've been a big help.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.
Sharon, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the comment for MACRA and the episode groups has been extended to March the 1st. And I know that's something we talked a little bit about. Maybe
we mentioned it last week.
We can talk a little bit more, but the episode grouper, I think it's going to be huge because it's taking the power to group our patients based on episode into something similar to a DRG, and how they're going to be using that. So if I'm sure someone at your facilities are gathering a comment, or you're doing that collectively with a group such as the physician advisor group.
Yeah, we can mention that again next week and talk about it a little bit more, Sharon. I don't think you got much of a chance to talk about it before, so we can stick that in next week's show. That'll be easy. Okay. Well, listen, that's all we've had time for here today. We are overtime as usual. Great conversation, great chat, great information. Dan and Glenn, thanks so much for coming on the show. And yeah, thank you for being here and helping us out.
Have a good weekend.
All right, and I just want to remind everybody we will be back live next Friday, February 19th, we'll have a special presentation about, I think it'll be about the Affirm Act and what Secretary Burrell was saying, and then probably some more from Sharon about the MACRA comments and everything, because there'll still be time for people to do that. So watch for my announcements. Thanks to everybody for participating today. This has been great. I will make sure everybody who put their email in the chat box will get you that case study, and then you can take a look at it, and we'll see about arranging some kind of a demo for you. Special thanks to Zermed, to Dan Ward and Glenn Krause. You guys were great today. Perfect. Thanks to my co-hosts Sharon Easterling and Bill Mom for all their help as usual. And, of course, thanks to my sponsors, the Health Law Partners, MedLinks, Cost Containment, Aerolib Healthcare Solutions, Recovery Analytics, and the CCMA. It's their contributions that make these shows possible, folks, so you should be grateful to them. At least go visit their sites. Watch for my emails about the February 19th show, and please share the links to our show with your colleagues and friends. And the last thing I want to do is share this with you from Alvin Toffler, a famous author. Look, it's perfect for today's show. The illiterate of the 21st century are going to be not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Perfect for today. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you next time when it's finally Friday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Don't know if any of you are still on. If you are, we're on private host conference mode, so we can actually talk with anybody hearing us. I got to copy all of this. And get to have to come up soon. Chat area 2, 12, 16. See, and where am I going to put that? I'm going to put that into Recipe 2012.